Okay, so I've pressed play and we are live. And this is scary for me because I pray that people show up. And of course they did. Like, of course they did. So hi, everyone. If you're here for the poetry night of the year, then you're in the right place. I'm going to let our room kind of hit a critical mass and then we'll get started. And this is the part for me as the hostess when I get to ask what's in everyone's background. And I see, so Andrea, you've got like books in the way background. But Jonathan, you have books like just behind you. So I'm going to ask you what's on your bookshelf, and then I'm going to ask everybody what they're reading.
What's on my bookshelf?
Yes, what's on your bookshelf? Like what's your favorite thing on your bookshelf?
Well, my William Blake collection right here. So yeah, it's my little shrine to William Blake.
Oh.
All of his stuff and a biography and, some other things. He was the first poet I really loved. So, I still, I honor him with this collection right here.
That's awesome. That's wonderful. What's behind you, Andrea? Like either in your bookshelf or anywhere. I mean, without,
This is something that's right beside me. We talk about little poems. This is a book that you poets probably know. It's a wonderful little book of called The Sea and the Honeycomb, a book of tiny poems edited by Robert Bly from Beacon Press. And if you like little poems, it's a good one. Yeah.
That's phenomenal. That's wonderful. Wayne, what's on your bookshelf behind you or what's on your desk?
A whole stack of papers are on my desk. I've arranged this camera so that you can't see that I'm sitting in a giant pile of clutter in my little basement office. I've been reading a bunch of Reginald Shepherd, so I have some Reginald Shepherd books. And then I saw Kevin Proofer is in attendance, so I can plug his book right here next to me. But yeah, I'm kind of surrounded by a disorderly pile of books.
As we all should be. I feel like that's the best kind of living is when we're doing that. I am also surrounded by disorderly piles of books. So good for you. Good for us all. I guess I should just get us started. So good evening, y'all. My name is Cara Wilson-Cook. I am the events coordinator for the Silver Unicorn Bookstore in Acton, Massachusetts. I am delighted to host our Poetry Month event with 3 authors. Jonathan Weinert, did I get that right? I did. Yeah, I did. Local, Andrea Cohen and Wayne Miller, who is joining us from all the way from Denver, Colorado, if I got that right. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Yeah, I did. I'm so good. Which is just like the wonders of technology that not only are we able to bring you poets, but we're able to bring you poets from all over the place. It's a delight to have you here and to host this event. I have with me Jonathan's new book, A Slow Green Sleep. We have actually the poetry books of all 3 of our poets here this evening. So please come by the Silver Unicorn Bookstore, which is open to you if you're local, or silverunicornbooks.com. Just a couple of housekeeping things. I want you to know that the chat is open so you can let our guests this evening know how awesome they are. And if you have questions about their craft or about what they've read this evening, go ahead and throw your questions into the Q&A. I'll be back at around 7:50 to facilitate your questions, and hopefully we'll get some very cool answers. I think that's it. I feel like this is the part where I decide that I'm rambling and I'm going to disappear. If I am correct, Andrea, you're reading first. Did I remember that correctly?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, brilliant. I am going to disappear and I will be back at 7:50. I just want to say happy National Poetry Month to you 3 wonderful artists. I want to say thank you for all of y'all who are here. And this is going to be a fantastic event. So I'll see you at 7:50. Have fun, y'all.
So thank you, Cara. Thank you, Wayne and Jonathan and everybody for being here. I'm particularly pleased to be reading with Jonathan and Wayne. Jonathan, I know from local readings and having gotten to hear him before. And Wayne, I know you through your poems and also through your beautiful editing as well. So thank you for that with your journal. So I'm going to read some poems from a new book, which is called Everything. And it looks like that. And I show the cover just on account of it's pretty. And then I'll read a few newer poems as well. So thank you everybody for being here. Wrecking Ball. Its offices are thin air. On days off, it still goes in. Wrecking balls are workaholics. They hang around up there. And even the idea of big sky crumbles. Desert Isle. If I have to go there, I'd like a phone book I can sit on a chair. I'd like to believe I'm a child someone comes back for. I did a reading last night, and what I didn't understand is that to read via Instagram, you have to have Instagram on your phone. So I had to put Instagram on my phone, and I thought, probably I'm one of the few people who doesn't have that, because I'm more the person who remembers sitting on a telephone book. Everything. Everything was beautiful and nothing hurt, Kurt Vonnegut said. Everything was beautiful and nothing hurt, the girl slurred to the artist at the tattoo parlor. The word made flesh isn't fictional. It's beautiful. It hurts. After. After the accident, we had the phrase after the accident. Also this, before the accident. We had a drawer marked before and after. And after and before happenings, we'd add atrocities and incidents and the wild asters, someone before and after keeps leaving. Fellow traveler. She went everywhere with an empty suitcase. You never know when you'll need to leave swiftly with nothing. Self-portrait with eraser. I drew the eraser first because I knew it better than I knew myself, and because it had been around the block before me, and because it would, after having its way with me, rub up against everything I'd ever loved. Too long. Too long at the fair, the song laments. No one sings of hanging around too long at the hospital. Someone kept getting stale coffee in paper cups. Someone kept punching a vending machine as if another hour might come out. Shiva. Evenings we sit in the living room together. Friday, I take my mother's slot noon at the beauty salon. Ruth, who for 40 years washed her hair, washes mine. We're all in the desert together. Your mother liked the water cold, Ruth says. News to me. From 1,000 mouths our dead assemble. You know, I started realizing when I started reading from this book that it's kind of a downer, kind of sad, these poems. I'm kind of a pretty happy person. But there you go, there's life. This is called Stretch. The stretch of sea between two signs that read, end of guarded beach, is roughly the wingspan of a flightless man, which is to say, the size of an embrace, which is what rough waters require. Love. It's an extreme sport, like indoor beekeeping. I hope you're laughing or crying. It's hard when you read and you can't hear what people are saying. Maybe you're throwing things at the screen. Maybe this is the rotten tomatoes that are getting thrown at the screen. We'll never know. I'm going to read one more poem from this book, and then I'm going to read some newer poems. This is called Bell. There was a bell that rang in my dreams. It was beautiful, and I was careful not to ring it too loudly, lest I wake. This is a little bit longer poem for me. It has more than 3 lines. It's called UFOs. I believe that things fly, that I don't know what they are or what they might signify. I see them all the time, behind the drive-in, inside my friends' eyelids, and just as frequently I witness objects I can't identify except to say they seem like children about to ask a question. Does everyone get their own sky? Is life really like a bullet you try to ride, or more like a buffet of baffling appetizers and entrees? Is it all you can steal? I steel myself to the mysteries, to believing everything flies in the face of classification. Why else would Miss Hessel have gathered us that afternoon in a glassy room in 3rd grade to watch her cry? Outside, monarch butterflies were auditioning for a movie called The World is Full of Mystery and Wonder, and we hovered above our futures. We beat our wings in ways we have failed in essay after essay, ever to replicate. And this is another poem called Stretch. Stretch. In limbo, I spoke into the phone, which translated that as in limo. In limo, she wrote back. OMG, she wrote. She'd asked me to marry her, casually, daily, the way you'd ask someone to bring home milk. In limo, she repeated, this time inside emojis of station wagons and champagne. And I thought, isn't limbo a kind of limo, a stretch of the actual, a sawing it in half and adding a luxurious bit to slip into? What color is the limo, she asked. Glittery, I lied. Sequined, I added. At a point, one gets out the saw. One opens up to let the mess and glamour of another in. One says, home, James, and the limbo driver into unverifiable nights drives on. And I'm going to read this one because it's one that Wayne published, I believe. Yeah, Eavesdropping on Adam and Eve. It didn't get interesting until after they'd left. An extended vacation, Adam called it. R&D, Eve said. Whatever. In Eden, they never said so much as pass the salt on account of everything tasting so great there. They were strangers until they left, when Adam confessed, I felt pinned in there, and Eve, forgetting how naked they'd been, said, I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Now they're both cobblers. Now they have so much to talk about, whether to spring for heat or vaccines, whether to call their interiors climate or weather, when the next ice age might hit. Adam pours himself another hieroglyph and asks, what does it all mean? And Eve does what she always does, wraps herself boa-like around him and holds the camera an arm's length above for a this is us moment for the snake they miss so much. And I'll read one more poem and thank you all. Piñata. It's not a lot to blindfold a child, to give him a couple good spins and a wooden bat, to tell him to swing his little heart out. Harder is to stock the piñata with rotted plums, with nettles, with a confetti of IOUs to fill that hollowness with consequences, with the truth about how nothing swung at blindly, with force and glee, yields anything resembling sweets. Thank you. And I'm going to turn mine off because then we're going to have Wayne. Okay. Yep.
That was really beautiful, Andrea. It was great to hear those. And I don't know about other people, but I was definitely laughing at the indoor beekeeping, like out loud. And I want to thank Jonathan and Andrea for being here reading with me. And I want to thank Kira Wilson-Cook for facilitating this and inviting us to read. And thank you all for coming. I'm going to begin with a Denver poem. I think this is my only Denver poem that's explicitly Denver. And but first I'm going to make my view no longer the speaker view, so I'm not just staring at my own face. Instead, I can just stare at your names. There we go. This is a Denver poem because it references rhino, which stands for River North, not for the animal, and is one of these neighborhoods that used to be sort of industrial and is now full of very boutique-y shops and fancy restaurants. This is called The American Middle Class. Built in the early 20th century, the barn stood across from where the subdivision fence pressed against the field. We carried pliers and chainsaws, crowbars, and wrecking hammers. We drove right up, bouncing through the knee-high weeds. First, we tore off the stuck doors, then the box stalls. Our sorted wood scraps grew into piles. When I pulled loose a long board from the sheathing, the barn's century-old shadow came apart. We dismantled it in strips until the pale, compacted dirt flooded with sun. The air we'd opened there stayed sweet and damp even when a breeze blew through. Next morning, Garrett went up on the ladder to pry down the rafters and purlins. Then the barn was gone. Driven in shifts for 2 days to Barnwood Recycling, who sold the lumber to Rhino Development for $4.75 a board foot. Clearly, the barn was not a metaphor. It became the grade interiors of 3 restaurants, 2 of them made from shipping containers. More important, it netted us $21,000, my third of which helped my wife and me pay for an IVF treatment, which is also not a metaphor. I had a weird, rare type of cataracts a couple of years ago. And so I became obsessed with eyes as I was preparing for this cataract surgery. And so this poem is a result of that. This is called Love Poem. The purpose of the eye is to narrow the world beyond the body to a receptive point inside the body. At the center of the retina, the fovea centralis clusters half the fibers of the optic nerve. Whatever light gets aimed to touch there comes from what the mind has focused on, while the rest of the retina holds in periphery every other thing the mind can see. For this reason, when I found your glasses on the shelf where one of the kids could grab them, I picked them up and put them out of reach. And this poem I wrote after the Pulse shooting, but sadly it could be written after any mass shooting. After Pulse, there was a report of when the EMTs and the various first responders went into what must have been a really horrific space. All of these bodies that had been shot, all of their cell phones were ringing, And so this poem is called Caroline. Phones were ringing in the pockets of the living and the dead, the living stepped carefully among. The whole still room was lit with sound like a switchboard, and those who could answer said hello. Then it was just the dead, the living trapped inside their clothes, ringing and ringing them. And this was the best image we had of what made us a nation. So I lived for 12 years in a small town in well, I didn't live in the town. I lived in Kansas City, but I taught for 12 years in a small town in rural Missouri. And I won a Fulbright a few years ago, and in celebration of that, was the first time I was told that 2 faculty members had gotten Fulbrights in the same year. And so we were invited to the president's house for this big dinner with the board. And the board of the university was, in my opinion, sort of horrifying. They were just, it was terrifying to me that they had all of this power over all of us. Because they were politically appointed and had very little interest in anything we were doing. So this poem is my revenge. It's a very weak revenge, as you'll find. Meeting the board. It was a beautiful antebellum house. The servers were Black students of the university. The silver was out and gibbous. All of this is true. One board member advised me in passing that a teenage daughter shouldn't work. She'd learn from her coworkers criminal things. Instead, she should play soccer. The chairman told us of his dream to gather the faculty in the conference center for a day of unified prayer. Our conversation turned briefly to the poor trapped inside the hurricane, which flashed its lightning into different cities at different times. Those people are never prepared, explained a board member's coiffed wife. The occasion was to mark a recent departmental success that no one expected the board to find interesting. The room was a capsule of their power they were obliged to inhabit before departing for their sealed and, I assume, magnificent box seats above the stadium. For that hour, their approval engulfed us like kudzu. They admired our work, they said, and understanding the balance required of their position, not to mention the impotence of literature. If they read it, they would probably admire this poem. Okay, this poem is in 2 sections. It's another Denver poem, actually. It's set in the airport in Denver. This is called The Future. 1. A bird in the airport hopping among our feet. Dun puffed chest, a sparrow, I think, collecting bits of popcorn beside the luggage while invisible speakers fill the air with names of cities irrelevant to the air outside from which this bird has become mysteriously separated. What should be done for her? Little feathered heart, little Dickinson maybe, who won't let any of us touch her. The light is mostly natural light. The high ceilings support beams make the environment not unsuitable. If only she could be coaxed down the jetway and onto the plane to take to the sky inside our human endeavor. Wouldn't that be a kind of release? 2. After we boarded and settled into our seats, after the lights dimmed and the movie began, the plane shifted course imperceptibly, disconnected now from the narrow bit of earth we expected to receive us. When we landed, we were together in that daze of arrival, carried reflexively by the moving sidewalk, the sky train, until I was already well inside the city I must assume was arriving suddenly into each of us. All around me, palm trees, saguaros, floating puffs of cloud. And it became clear we were in of all places, Phoenix. This is in a few short sections. This is called Rain Study. 1. All night, the channeling of water in the gutters keeps tracing the outline of the house. 2. My son's face pressed to one side of the glass, the storm to the other. He's too young to understand why the trees swing around in nightmare mechanical motion, but the rain filling the air before him must have something to do with it. Each flash of lightning brings the present more sharply into the present. He turns back to our space inside it. 3. It was raining in the capital, and the nation's new delight, the war, was on. A thick fuzz of rain stood on its pin tips in every street. The awnings hung their empty rooms like diving bells inside that falling. 4. Again, my daughter is talking in her sleep, her language just water cycling through a fountain. And my son, who can't yet speak, endless rain. 5. Then my wife and I were alone in the house for the first time in months, a shocking quiet dampened further by the gray of rain. When the wind gusted, a drop sometimes landed in a square of the bedroom's window screen. Later, the scattered placement of water there offered a record of the afternoon. 6. On the undersurface of a raindrop as it falls, a fish-eyed reflection of the ground rising at tremendous speed, and that's it. Just a couple more. This is in 2 sections. It's called Middle Age. 1. This body, which equals a life, no more, no less, and thus is incomplete, even asleep, even watching TV, soon will rise to pee, to find itself in the mirror examining what this body appears to be. And I was wrong thinking time gathers inside me. I was wrong inside my body moving through time. So that now I imagine a dot matrix print head growing a picture, each pass revealing one more line of body until the image is whole, and then some other body must come and dispose of it. 2. At my 1-week follow-up appointment, I listened to the person who had opened for the first time ever my abdominal cavity, grown from nothing like the hollow of a pepper. I watched her fingers hold a plastic pen that marked on a pad her swoops of thought. The light around us had poured into my body, annihilating its darkness where no one lives. I'm just going to read 2 more poems. The first is a very short sonnet, and well, I guess it's a sonnet-length sonnet. And then the second is just in a couple sections. So this is a sonnet. It's called Invention of the Afterlife. When his friend's last notes and letters arrived in a heavy envelope, he found more than 100 pages bound simply with a rubber band. For 3 hours, he dragged his mind through the strands of her tight cursive. He was surprised that he recognized almost none of the thoughts and events related there. He'd assumed he would gain a clearer vision of her lost interior, but in the end, so little was revealed, he decided the reading had barely counted even as reading. It was more like combing her hair. And then this poem is in 3 sections, and I decided that I wanted to write a poem about the super rich, but to write about them, I decided that I had to kill them. So this is called From the Afterlife of the Rich. 1. It's in their voice. 1. We were rich. In the valley below, the highway formed a pave river, and down in the orchestra pit, the musicians were clothed in our sustaining contributions. Our portfolios swelled and contracted inside digital rib cages, and that silent breathing was the breathing of a spirit that's beyond you. When we left, our houses filled with security, mute and clear like still water. When we returned, that presence withdrew into our secret codes. All summer long, a mist rose off our lawns. I'm sure you'd say like steam resurfacing from a buried 19th century. It was recycled water on a timer for the grass. 2. We were the rich. We glimpsed the poor smoking dumbly on their stoops, lugging gas cans to their drained vehicles. We filled their televisions as though we were fictional characters. We recalled their revolutionary songs. We could see them covet our luxury hybrids. They looked up to us, you know, with the blankness of a field of tiny flowers. When they agitated, it was like a breeze out of nowhere passed across their surface. That trembling was lovely when observed from a distance. In a minute, it would stop. 3. But our lives, too, were visited by elemental tragedies, deaths of parents, illnesses of children, fires that absolutely failed to light. Poet, with your minuscule economy, simply no one understands. I know what you'll say. Your art was there for us, and yes, it was. More important, in those moments of terror and empty, useless grief, our primary need was sympathy, real sympathy, which we, like all the living, deserved. Thank you. I'm going to mute myself and disappear behind my my still picture and let Jonathan take over now.
Thank you so much, Wayne, and thank you all for joining tonight. I'm very honored to be reading here with Andrea and Wayne, 2 tough acts to follow, but I'll do my best. I want to thank Cara Cook and everyone at Silver Unicorn Bookstore for making this possible. Thank God for independent bookstores. If you live in the area, you should come out to Acton and check it out. It's a great place. I'm going to read a handful of poems from my new book, A Slow Green Sleep. And if there's time, maybe a couple of new ones. Incarnation Panel. A small peculiarity of mesh and carbon rose from nothing, designed by no one, but with a pattern everyone could recognize. Such is the record written on the body, the cell's emergent calculus, then a plunge described by ones and zeros toward a mill through which the waters of a poisoned river fall, engaging its great red wheel. I remember how the lifeboats drifted from the wreckage with their cargoes of stars and particles. Holes had been torn in the net of pure space, and inside I could see my father's hands before the honey had unstrung them. The ones made accidents, the zeros followed, until the sky's blue surface looked for all the world like a calm that one could plummet through. Dumb in the forest, I came to myself, and though I was almost blind, I pledged allegiance to the flag of the United States of the Visible. How it ends. It rained and it rained and it rained. And in the end, people just left their stuff and went off somewhere to die like tired old dogs. In the vague light promise of the drowned city, two Italian shopkeepers argued bitterly over something that couldn't possibly still matter. And in the end, they threw their heavy aluminum cafe chairs into the water, although the shoreline had mostly been erased by then. And it was just waves rolling in between the sidewalks and up the marble steps of banks. Some rich guy figured out how to stoke a machine with various size vials of gold powder to simulate his daily presence with a show of pressures and differences. But it didn't give much satisfaction, and anyway, for what audience beyond his own estranged imagination? I didn't want to die, but in the end, the city made a pano of rain flood, and cars idled on the street sides with the too pink light of the cobra heads glaring in their eyes and burnishing their curves in all the latest styles. I didn't know how to get out of this life, but then again, that's always been the problem, hasn't it? The Horsemen of the Ice. This poem is for you, Kevin Proofer. Some could not believe it was happening, even as the oceans rose like sucked in breath, even as the current died in the wires, blinding the eyes of the useless TVs, even as the houses on the shoreline dropped into the harbor one by one, like fruit from overhanging trees. It was a new chance for the crows, blank and clicking in their murders, picking out the eyes of the downtown corpses, such that none would dare walk past them on their way from warehouse store to hideout. No one ate the windfall apples for the noise they made. Sunlight fell in the empty streets on roses rioting in the arbors. The people cared for the world, but had forgotten how to tell it. So many furtive in the streets with their breakage, steering with their gas pump hands, staring with their flat screen eyes, and with their mouse wheel fingers pointing and clicking. Then the machines that ate the topsoil stalled. Jimson weed and sawgrass swallowed up the fields. The farmhouse's brows collapsed, and the creeks once choked with slag ran free. The farmer and his wife slept in their bed. The farmer's many children slept in their beds. The farmhands slept in their beds, and the fields threw over them a cold green sheet, stopped up their mouths and eyes, and they slept. The empire of the seed corn fell, and sawgrass broke the backs of the roads. My brain felt good inside my head as the sun expired and the horsemen of the ice rode out. I found their confusion beautiful, the death lovers and the life haters driven through the same red fuse. Lined up just so. Oh, I should mention that a number of the titles of poems in this book are phrases I borrowed from a book that I love by H.L. Hicks called As Much As, If Not More Than. And this is one of those titles, Lined Up Just So. If in the next world we will refuse to matter, we matter to ourselves in this one, like several species of migratory birds, sharing the same hierarchy of wires, with evening falling, if not exactly sooner, then with greater delicacy, on the last oak's proffered limbs, as we prefer. However soon the memories of cities leave us isn't soon enough. Nomadic without religion, mosaic in all accepted senses of the word, we share the darkness with a dozen unreal terrors that are worse. So much that's beautiful has been lost, but then there are these shadows in the grass, mimicking triumphal marbles that have fallen, rising to the level of beauty by virtue of their absence. Beauty is now an eye-high sort of style, appearing through an after image, lensless, or it's notarized and standard, a compact that nobody intends to honor. Not these several kinds of songbirds cracking seeds of darkness in their beaks. Tending to the humors of our less immediate natures blunts the passage of a recollected impulse to make too much sense of sensation, while the swallows, swifts, and winged victories inhabit an imperceptible air, like certain wall drawings downtown that nobody can interpret. Recognition places us in fields of various colorings, characters in separate plays where words no longer turn to bits and pentacles. So much that's beautiful has been lost, as colors lost to the blind from birth, an absence unfelt and so impossible to name. Monadic without unity, fractured in all accepted senses of the world, we mass together, taken in the aggregate like corn or bullets, as though the storehouse of another's face contained commodities one needs. If in the next world stones are lives, then dead things still have eyes that see us, even if our names no longer signify, even if we hurry into shelters out of range of all pernicious influence. We matter to ourselves as workers matter to their factories, useless in the darkened theater of the third growth trees, as if the world had shrugged and turned away, having said the perfect thing. In human form, but ghostly. A train of shadows maneuvers eastward, entering the dark arch where a river, dry almost down to its stones, still flows out, writing a silver line across the valley, a line whose argument is perspective, convergence, dispersal, the absence at the heart of every apprehension. In the hollow at the back of my head stood a range of mountains, high in childhood, now a line of worn down hills, subtracting color from the radiation. My dissipated enthusiasms have the power to blow the planets backwards in their orbits, or feel as though they do. As the communications frequencies fill with chatter and a darkness grows that no human language can dispel, I slip into a vanishing interval crammed with sound. Poised here in a green lacuna between construction sites, I haunt the sheer unlikelihood of all this shine, these snagged perspectives, these disappearing lines. And I think I'll read a few new ones. I've been inspired, or maybe given permission by Andrea to read a very short poem. So I will. It's called Justice. I've made a dark hole in the back of my head for the animals to enter. I think inevitably, given the length of the lockdown, my poems become more local. many of them set in my the backyard behind my house, which is very close to Acton. I could actually walk to the Silver Unicorn. The day before Thanksgiving 2020. All day with the stove and the water. Across the field at the edge of the woodland, ghosts. Illness rained her little fists against the skylight, nosing her way in. Later, when the house was still, I read a chapter in the great white book of my privilege. I heard a roar beyond the silence as of countless voices laid one on top of another. Then I did what my people have been brought up to do. I refused to listen. Town lines. A drum roll of autos, please, and maybe a siren beating its scream along South Acton Road. I scan the rusted green from deck to meadow to woodland, some part of which I own. A gray cloud rolls its carpet out across Red Acre Village, my own, my home. There is only this little blister of madness and mammal warmth. No inch of what I see belongs to me. And I think I'll close with this poem, Squirrel Hour, which nods vigorously in the direction of Robert Lowell's Skunk Hour. Squirrel Hour. The wind goes into the backyard pines, a long grammar of sighs, and comes out needle sharp and shouting. Way off in a bush, the cry of a small bird like a squeaky door opens. What stillness it takes to move out of oneself. I sit on the deck in my zero gravity recliner and watch a stop motion squirrel scope me as he tacks beneath the feeder, tense with self-awareness. He strips a hazelnut like a lathe, pins me with his bitter stare, then strips another, and he will not scare. Thank you. Well, I guess that means that we can all come back on screen.
Wow, that was incredible. I'm trying to make sure that that everybody can see everybody. I hope that is true. Yes, congratulations and just bravo to all three of you. That was beautiful. This is your opportunity, audience, to ask your questions. I know that we already have one Q&A, one question in the Q&A, but as a host, I get to ask the first question. So, and my question goes to all three of you. As we, for the audience, we all kind of chatted in the beginning before the cameras turned on, and I mentioned that I write prose, and I think that what is really amazing about poetry is the economy of language. Every single word counts. And so I would love to know a little bit about how each of you approaches your craft and what the economy of words means to you. And of all the poems that you shared with us this evening, what are the lines that have, stood out most to you? And I will ask, we'll go in order of readers. So Andrea, how about you go first?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, first of all, thanks, Kira. And again, what wonders to listen to my fellow poets this evening. Thank you. I'd say that I am driven very much by sound. like a lot of poets, I think, and that's what carries me along. And in those little poems, there is a desire to sort of get down to the kernel as much as one can. And what I can say is, what's memorable to me in this reading, um, particularly Wayne, in your reading, it's that pulse poem, right? How poignant and powerful and sorrowing the sounds of those phones are, and I think that it's probably something that we have thought about, but you really bring that to life. And then in Jonathan's strange poem about that opening in the back of the head, right? I was left thinking about that, thinking what's going on there, and it's kind of like one wants to keep turning around to see that hole where the animals are invited in. And there's this, I think in both of those poems, there is a strangeness and a mystery, which attracts me as a reader or as a listener, and it's an opening up, and to me that's an invitation to us.
I would say that I'm certainly compelled by sound in my poems, and I pay a lot of attention to sound, but I think I'm driven by image first. A lot of my writing process involves these little notebooks, or these days often the notes section in my phone if I don't have my notebook near me, where some image will spark some connection between two things, and I just write those down, and then later I'm trying to figure out how to thread them together into something that has a kind of coherency. And that's, I think, when sound starts to matter to me, but the initial impulse is usually image. And I mean, I think that I'm trying to think of a way to describe sort of what really sticks with me about Andrea and Jonathan's readings. And there's a sort of macro thing, which is, Andrea's poems are these short poems mostly, not always, but mostly. But it's interesting that they're driven so much by assertion. And I think a lot of poets are wary of being assertive. And part of what I admire so much about Andrea's poems, I mean, they might have images, they might have metaphors, they might have, a variety of things in them, but I feel like the way that Andrea's poems assert things overtly, this is what makes them feel large even in their shortness, if that makes sense. I think that's why, I mean, they're not aphorisms because they're lineated and they're just as much about sound, but the thinking is often aphoristic. And so, but because I love image, that image of the indoor beekeeping is something that really sticks with me, and did indeed make me laugh. And then with Jonathan's poems, and I've spent I've read Andrea's past books, but I haven't read the new book yet. But with Jonathan's book, the new book, I have read it. But even hearing him read from it, it really struck me how even more sort of harrowing and apocalyptic those poems, some of those poems anyway, feel to me than they do on the page. Hearing them in your voice, they just feel even more fraught hearing them come from a body in a way. Rather than be sort of, spoken to me across the page where it's just me thinking about them. And the poem that stuck with me, maybe because it's a newer poem, as new to me and exciting, was that poem about Thanksgiving. And again, that assertion at the end is really interesting to me. I'm always interested in how poets make assertions work, because I think it's hard for them not to feel overly laden somehow. And I thought that was a poem where the ending was an aggressive assertion in a really good and interesting way. So I thought they were both wonderful, but it was great to hear both of you read. And I like both of your poems a lot, independent of this reading, but those were things that really stuck with me.
Yeah, well, I think I share in common with Andrea and Wayne, and maybe one of the reasons why we're sort of bound each other together in this reading. One thing I share in common with them is kind of the, really interested in the music of poetry and the sound. That's always very important to me, and it often guides the revision process, I guess. It's interesting, Cara, to hear you say that you use poetry as a way to kind of get the wheels going for writing prose. I do the opposite. I read prose in order to kind of get language in the system, and then my writing process has really changed over the years, and what I've started to do lately, something that I'd never done before, is just allow myself to kind of spew words, without much intention into my notebook, which I carry around with me a lot, or into the phone like you, Wayne, because it's 2021, so you have to, right? And then trying to, it's usually the music of a phrase ultimately that sparks the beginning of a poem for me. I think one thing that I admire so much about your poems, Wayne, is the thinking in them. To me, they really kind of trace the movements of your mind, and your mind goes in a way that I admire, but that my mind doesn't go. So I always find that very, and I don't know, you said it was imagery really, but maybe that's the same thing. I always find that really exciting in your poem, and maybe because I am a middle-aged man, the poem that you read, or the title of which I can't remember now, about being middle-aged, really, really got me. So, and I read your book, Everything, Andrea, and it really got me thinking about short poems and what they do. And I think that there's something about these assertions or these little bursts of of language that, and then they're just sort of at the edge of this cliff of silence. That's what it seems like to me. And I think that just allowing those things to be heard and to kind of resonate in this silence. And you did it when you read too. You left a long pause between each poem, which I appreciated, because that's how I hear them. There's a lot of white space on the page, and you sort of recreated that with the silences that you left between the poems. But I think the silences are almost as important as the poem. There's almost a balancing there between what you say and what you haven't said, that resonates in the silence after the poem's end. So.
And that's so true. The white space matters. It really matters. I'm so glad that you highlighted that. That's important. I know that we're at the top of the hour, but Aaron Weinert put something in the Q&A, and I just want to make sure that it gets elevated before we say goodbye. So the question is for Andrea. Aaron says, I think that your short poems are fascinating and beautiful, with so much contained in so few words. It reminds me of haiku. Is that a form that has influenced you?
Thank you. I know when I was a kid, we did write haikus. I don't think that I am, working in a strict format the way the haiku does with syllabics and counting. But very often it is maybe not so far off with a kind of image or some kind of journeying or a turn within that very short space. Yeah, thanks.
This has been wonderful. This has just wonderful. I want to thank this wonderful audience. Actually, I see somebody with their hand up. Molly, you have your hand up. Are we okay with Molly asking a question live? Do y'all have time for just a couple more minutes? Okay, brilliant. Molly, I'm going to allow you to speak. Does that work out? Hello?
I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, hello. This is Molly Peacock. I'm a huge fan of Jonathan Weinert. So I'm here tonight, and then I got to discover Andrea Cohen and Wayne Miller. So I'm thrilled to be here. I was just wondering, I posed one question about what made you the most frightened about the poems that you read tonight. Was there anything that you we're nervous about. That's always a little sign to me of something that's going to burgeon later in your work. So that was one thought I had, but another thought I had was, what poem that you read tonight made you somehow or another feel most liberated in terms of your own aesthetics? So those were just two questions that popped into my mind. But I certainly don't mean to extend this any longer. We're already at 2 minutes after 8. Those were big questions. So really what I wanted to just say is how happy I am to be here.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Molly. All right, do you want to answer those really quick and then we'll say goodbye? So I think it was most scary and most liberating.
Well, I guess I'll start. I mean, I thank you, Molly, and it's just a delight to see you here. Molly was my teacher, and she's a friend, and I'm just very grateful to her for all the guidance that she's given me poetically and otherwise over the years. I think, you know, for me, the thing that always makes me nervous when I read poems from this book, especially, is, you know, they're pretty. People always say, use the word apocalyptic. I guess that's true. They're pretty dark, some of the poems. And when I'm reading them, I'm thinking, oh God, why, you know, people aren't going to want to hear this. It's like, it's too grim. And yet, at the same time, I think there's something, you know, to me, I'm trying to find beauty in this. You know, there are things that are difficult to face that we're facing. I mean, I think that's become especially apparent in this last year, right? Even though these poems were all written well before the pandemic was even, you know, something that we even heard of. But yeah, I guess that's what made me nervous. And then liberating. I think the really short poem, I've never really allowed myself to do that before. And, you know, it's something that really interests me. So I think I'll pursue that a little bit more.
That's great. Any, Wayne and Andrea, do you have any poems that were liberating or scary for the two of you?
I would just say that for me, they're often the same, sort of in order. That the thing that I find initially scary about a poem then becomes something that feels liberating about it. So, and often that has to do with giving myself permission to sort of write from a perspective or to inhabit a particular place. I think that the Afterlife of the Rich poem, it took me a while to sort of figure out how I was going to write about money in this way that I was interested in trying to write about. I think that, you know, we tend not to, like, money doesn't show up all that often in poems, and yet so much of just the lyric spaces that poems take place in, houses, cars, airplanes, for me, a lot of airplanes, you know, they're all involved in money in some way. And so I think when I realized that I was going to write that just in the voice of all these dead rich people, that was initially scary and then liberating.
I don't think writing poems is very scary for me. I think it, maybe I'm just assertive like Wayne says. I think it's just fun to me. And I feel like, what's the worst thing that could happen, you know? And so, you know, what's the most liberating? I'd say generally it's, you know, whether it's a poem necessarily that I read tonight, but, you know, kind of the newest thing is what I'm always most excited about. And one other thing I'll say is sometimes when there's a poem that seems to maybe in a short space do something like, I guess that poem Shiva means something to me because that's about my mom, and that's real. And a lot of, not that my other poems aren't real, but I mean, sometimes maybe part of why I say it's not scary to me is because maybe in some way I hide behind something, you know, behind some way of writing that I have. A poem like Shiva, it's like, yeah, this is real. Yeah. So that's liberating more than scary. Yeah.
I love that answer. Wow. Wow. This has been really lovely. I'm so grateful. I'm grateful for the generosity of your time as we stayed a little bit late, as well as the generosity of your art. You three each have given us something profound and beautiful. So just thank you so much for spending your evening with us. For this audience that has also been generous and has stuck with us from the beginning to the end, I just want to say thank you so much. I want you to know that Everything by Andrea Cohen and We the Jury by Wayne Miller and A Slow Green Sleep by Jonathan Weinert are all available at the Silver Unicorn Bookstore and at silverunicornbooks.com. For you who are fans, then you should know that we have many events coming up throughout the month of April and into May and even into June. So please visit our website, silverunicornbooks.com, to learn more and check out the events page. And I think that that's it. We just so love doing these events. I love hosting poets. This has just been so wonderful. Just thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you so much, Cara.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Come back soon. All right. And for all the rest of y'all, for all y'all, stay safe out there. And we will see you soon. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.